Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. Thanksgiving, or specifically the lack of knowledge of Canadian Thanksgiving. When we think of Thanksgiving, most people imagine the American Thanksgiving, which is November whatever, and it's always before Black Friday, which is really weird because you're giving thanks for all you have before you trample your fellow citizens, but I digress. Canadian Thanksgiving actually has a very fascinating and kind of dumb and silly history to it. And not enough people know about it, and that's what's bothering me today. So, a lot of us think that the first Thanksgiving feast of some kind was held in 1621 by the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock. This is kind of true, but if we want to talk about the first actual meal where thanks was given, as you know, for something to be thankful for, then that was actually the English explorer Martin Frobisher and his crewmates when they safely arrived in Newfoundland, which was like northern Canada, in 1578. Their version of a Thanksgiving meal was salted beef, biscuits, and mushy peas. Some of that peak British cuisine for you. And if we want to think about a kind of Thanksgiving meal, as in giving thanks to God, like there's a lot of religious ceremony to Thanksgiving in Canada and America, then this is an example of how, if you want to get really technical about it, the first Thanksgiving was actually earlier and like somewhere in the Arctic. And then later on, in 1606, you had Samuel de Champlain, the governor of New France, what we now call like Quebec and stuff. He had several large festive meals with the Mi'kmaq, an indigenous people in eastern and Atlantic Canada. And these were sort of feasts designed to, they would happen several times a year or like monthly or something like that. And the idea was this was under something that he called l'ordre de bon temps, or the order of good cheer. And the Order of Good Cheer, their job was to keep people feeling good during some of the darker and more brutal months of the long Canadian winter. So there would be feasts every few weeks. They'd wine and dine and drink cider and cranberry juice. And cranberries, actually, they didn't realize this, they're rich in vitamin C, and so it helped keep scurvy at bay. So they felt that this was a very important thing, and that's part of why cranberries are such an important staple at Thanksgiving, is because they're a native, as in both the natives use them and it's indigenous to North America. They are a native source of vitamin C, as opposed to, you know, limes, oranges, citrons, and other things more common in the old world. So if you want to know why we eat cranberries at Thanksgiving, there's your reason why. Now, in terms of the actual traditional Thanksgiving meal as we know it in Canada and America, so turkey, stuffing, potatoes, gravy, root vegetables, this was actually introduced by United Empire loyalists who were fleeing the end of the American Revolutionary War, and they were still loyal to the Crown of England, or Britain really at this point. And so they came up to what remained of the British Empire in North America. And this is why so many of them went to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, and Ontario, which would become the foundational basis of Canada. Now, on top of this, you know, this is where that traditional meal gets introduced. And then that gets sort of exported around the rest of the country by the Brits. And so now I want to get into some of the weird food history of Canadian Thanksgiving. So by this point in time, and not until like the 1920s, I think, Thanksgiving was not a national holiday. And in fact, it only had relatively sparse regional observance, and everyone kind of had their own way of observing it. People on the East Coast would typically celebrate with nice fish or lobster. People in Quebec would celebrate with some kind of roast, like a roast ham, or a nice big meat pie known as a tourtière. And wherever else you were, it might be something different. It could be venison roast, it could be turkey. But as I said, the actual meal that we think of with like turkey, potatoes, and stuffing, that was actually brought by former Americans who went to Halifax because they didn't want to be American, they still wanted to be British. And then from there, it sort of spread to the rest of British North America. And this is also where we kind of get into the weird history of British harvest festivals, because there were a few and people celebrated them, but they celebrated whatever the local harvest was, which is why celebration was so sparse and different, because harvest times were different across the country, and what you harvested or what was in season was also different. So eventually what ends up happening is you have all these sort of sparse regional celebrations of the harvest. And this sort of goes largely uninterrupted until World War One. So after World War One, and everyone realizes how horrifying it was, we then decide as Canadians, or the Canadian government decided, that, you know what, we want to merge Remembrance Day and Thanksgiving Day as a day to remember and to give thanks. And so there was this period in Canadian history in the 1920s where Thanksgiving was actually celebrated the same time as Remembrance Day. But eventually this fell out of favor because more and more people had a problem with kind of trying to celebrate something while also remembering the harrowing hell that was World War One. And so they were separated again. And this is where the Canadian government decided that it would be a general harvest of what was being harvested in Canada at that time, which broadly speaking means the second Monday in October. That's sort of the end of the harvesting season in Canada. And that's why ours is celebrated around the same time as Columbus Day in America. So while Americans are going to be celebrating Columbus Day on Monday, in Canada that's also a holiday, but that's the Thanksgiving Monday. So this begs the question, why do both nations have a holiday on the same day? And this is where shit gets really stupid. So it's not so much that Canada wanted a holiday alongside America. It's that they knew that people would want one anyway. You know, oh, hey, how come they get more holidays off? We want holidays too. And this is why a lot of holidays tend to line up. And because of our shared British history, this also informs a lot of them as well. Kind of like how in Canada in May we have the Victoria Day long weekend, but I think it also lines up with whatever it is, Memorial Day in the United States. It's kind of like the unofficial start of summer. Like, it's just typical silly stuff. But part of the reason why this came to be is because of several evangelical figures, both in Canada and the United States, who wanted a sort of occasion to give thanks for what they had in life. There were several, I think, Anglican and Episcopalian leaders here in Canada who were advocating for Thanksgiving to be separated from not only Remembrance Day, but also to be something of a religious holiday, which is why still you'll see, whether you're in Canada or America, people will still have some kind of, all right, hold hands, let's all say grace as we give thanks for this meal. This is kind of where that comes from. But it really just shows how silly the whole thing is, in terms of we in Canada don't even know the history of our own Thanksgiving. And of course ours just completely ignores the natives, with perhaps an exception of mentioning celebrations and feasts between Champlain and the Mi'kmaq. But that's just very much a footnote. And even then, most people outside of Quebec wouldn't know that. And so it's a shame that we don't even know our own history, because there's some fascinating and admittedly dumb and silly history here. But no one knows about it. And I don't think most people care, which is kind of sad because I'd like to think that as I've talked about it here, there's some weird and fascinating history between Martin Frobisher and the actual first Thanksgiving, Samuel Champlain and the Order of Good Cheer, and why cranberries are a big part of the feast, the traditional meal as we know it being brought to Canada by United Empire Loyalists and then spread across the rest of the territories from Halifax. There's some fascinating stuff here, but we don't know about it for whatever reason. I don't even know the reason. And yet we walk around celebrating this, largely important cultural holiday to us. It's a big deal after like Canada Day, Christmas, Halloween. Thanksgiving is one of the big holidays in Canadian culture and society at large. And yet we're really ignorant of the history of our version of it. And no one seems to care. And that's what's bothering me today.